welcome to another Dawn and Julia Create. So this week we are doing something a little bit different. We are going to be getting our sewing machines out and seeing how we can add stitching detail to our Papercraft projects. So this is the box of scraps that inspired this challenge. So I made myself a skirt last year using an old divvy. And that was all the offcuts from after I had overlocked the skirt and trimmed it. And of course I squirreled it away thinking that will make a perfect craft project one day. So I've decided to use it on a journal page. So I've just taken a page out of my MDF journal. That's a Mad Hatter's one, and I've taken this page and I'm just loosely drawing some circles, and they are going to be some guidelines for me to start adding my fabric pieces. So I've just got a little bit of gel medium. I'm just putting a very small thin wash of this over the areas that I want to stick down, and this is just to sort of lightly hold that fabric in place until I can get it into the sewing machine. So this challenge, as you saw my little box of scraps, I had squirreled this away, kind of knowing that I wanted to do this project with it, but had never got round to it. So I was doing the Dawn and Julia Create and watching Dawn's video, and it was the one where we were upcycling or recycling packaging or something, recycling, using a recycled element to create art. And Dawn was absolutely determined not to use cardboard just so that she could get one over on me, because that's the sort of lovely friend that she is. Anywho, in that video she had this pot that she wrapped round with string and wool, and as she was playing with this she goes, oh, I'd love to get little fabric scraps and some wool one day and stitch it all together. And I was like, challenge. Challenge accepted. So that was the inspiration behind this particular challenge, and I knew that it was something that both Dawn and it was in our heads to do. And sometimes we do that with Dawn and Julia Creates. We have something in our heads, but life is busy. We both run our own design business, our own craft business. We have other videos to do, and sometimes the ideas that are in our head don't sort of make it into real life projects. But by adding it to a Dawn and Julia Create, that way we do. So as you can see with this, I have just gradually taken little bits of this fabric and adding it to the page. There was a striped fabric and a floral fabric, so we do have various gradients. There's lots of different colours in here. Also, because it was overlocked areas and the style of the skirt, some of this fabric already has little bits of stitching on, so there's quite a lot of texture. We've got the fabric, we've got stitching, we have threads that are loose, and now we're going to have even more stitching. So I'm just using this under my machine. I'm going fairly slowly because I want to get a nice round shape. So those round circles that I had, I'm emphasising that now with a stitching detail. Now, have you guys used fabric and stitching in your projects? I have to say, I have done in the past, but it's always such a faff getting my sewing machine out. But because I had it out, I had an absolute blast. I loved it. I had so much fun doing this. In fact, because the sewing machine was on my desk, I ended up adding stitching to a few more projects that are coming in the future as well. Highly recommend it. You're not going to damage your machine. You may blunt your needle slightly. It's a bit like your fabric scissors. You know, you should only use your fabric scissors with fabric and not with paper. But you can just change the needle and have one for paper crafts and have one for stitching. Now, as you saw, I barely used any of my scraps, so I decided that, seeing as it was all out and I still had loads of scraps, why not make a second page? So this page I am somewhat winging it because I didn't have an idea in my head. So as I often do with a journal page, sometimes it's just about getting something on the paper. On the paper. It is currently almost 7 o'clock in the morning. My brain has not kicked in. I did do a voiceover last night, but I thought it sounded very monotone, so I had to come down and redo it. So anyway, paper. I've just added a little bit of book paper. This is Alice in Wonderland paper, and it's just to kind of get rid of that blank page so that we are at least working with something. And I also wanted, because the last page that we just started, I glued the fabric down and then stitched it, I also wanted to try just grabbing the fabric and stitching on as it came, as opposed to sort of putting it in place first. So we're going to have a very different look with this page than we did with the first page. So I'm just preparing this, putting a really thin layer down because I'm aware that obviously I want to put this through my sewing machine. So as you can see, I've just grabbed those little strips and I am stitching it down, and I'm putting multiple strips together. I'm not worried about them being straight. I'm kind of deliberately scrunching up the fabric in various places so we get lots of bumps and texture, and I put the fabric going in different directions as well. I've kind of followed the rule of three, and then I stitched around the edge. I always do a doodly border to finish things off, and I was like, I can do a stitched one. So I stitched around this one, and then as soon as I finished stitching around this one, I stitched around this original one as well. So this one has a stitched border too. So we're going to focus on this page for just now and come back to that other one in a bit. And the first thing that I am going to do is put a layer of transparent gesso down. Now that's because we are going to be working with all our normal mediums, and obviously fabric is not designed to take paints and whatnot, so it just helps it to have a nice even surface to work on. And I'm going to work with my jelly gouache. So excited about having a play with these. I bought these at the end of last year and as yet have not dipped my toe in the water. And I'm not going to lie, I was always of the opinion that jelly gouache was just a little bit of a gimmick. It was only when I saw the Chloe Rose art video. She'd lost a whole lot of her art supplies and she had to replace some, and one of the things that she chose to replace was her Hemi gouache. And I just thought, okay, so they obviously aren't, artists are enjoying them. So I went and bought myself some, and I love gouache. One of the reasons I like gouache is that you can work with them as you would acrylics. They are thick and they are creamy and they are gorgeous. And also I am used to colouring dark to light. It's the way I colour with my alcohol markers. So sometimes I get in a little bit of a pickle when I'm doing my watercolours, because for watercolours you have to go light to dark. There is no other way. But with gouache you've got a gorgeous opacity which allows you to then sort of add extra details in a lighter colour and for it to work. Now what I didn't know about gouache is normally you pop it out in a tube and you use it like that and it's nice and creamy. And I have actually made a gouache palette where I've put gouache into a palette and it dries out and I reactivate it with water. But if you do that, it's pretty much just like a watercolour then. You don't ever regain that gorgeous creaminess that a gouache is known for. So having the jelly gouache means it sort of stays in that creamy state, which means you are going to get those gouache effects and have more permanency to that. It's not like it's going to dry out in your palette and then you're using with watercolour. You can still activate it and use it, you're just not going to get that creaminess. I am going to do a video on gouache a lot more and go into that in a lot more detail. And this is just my first play, but as I said, loving them so far. So this is a mixed media project. I'm just going to literally throw everything I can at it. So now we've got the pencils out, and that pencil sharpener is amazing, by the way. I always get a really nice point in it. It's the first pencil sharpener that has kind of consistently worked for me. So I've done some scribbling, and as I was doing the scribbling, I was like, I could so be doing this and creating this effect with stitching detail. So I grabbed out this box of treasures that I have, and I used to do a lot of cross stitch. I didn't start my paper crafting journey until I was in my mid-20s probably. I originally started off with soft crafts. I was making my own clothes from about the age of 11. Then cross stitch, I always had a cross stitch on the go. I really need to get back to that actually. And so I have lots of threads and things left over from when that was my main passion. Once Papercraft took over, that's the hobby that stuck, but I have pretty much tried most things going. But this is the great thing about crafting and mixed media. We don't have to stick to one thing. We don't have to stick to one art medium. We don't have to stick to one technique. I mean, on this, we've got gouache, we've got pencil, we've got fabric, we've got stitching, now we have threads. So all of these skills that we have learned in various different hobbies can be crossed over and make one unique project. And I just find that incredibly exciting and interesting and fun. So I decided to get these threads out and add a little bit of grass detail. And what this is doing now is just adding another layer of texture, another element. I do find that with projects, I really like it if I am looking at it and there's lots of layers to it, and you keep looking at it, and every time as you look at it, you're like, oh, there's something else, and oh, there's something else, and there's always more to see. And adding lots of textures and mediums really does help with this. So I do this technique here with that light green, the dark green that you're seeing now, and then also a glitter thread as well. And in between what you just saw and now, I seem to have dry brushed the trees with white gesso. And yet somehow, despite the fact that I have been making videos for more years than I care to admit right now, I failed to record that part. So I am very sorry, but we do we do some dry brushing on the next page, so we will get to have a little look at that technique there. But the reason that we do the dry brushing is just to bring out the texture of it, because sometimes it can get a little bit lost. Now I have stamped and coloured a whole load of images from the Woodland Tot collection, and as you can see I am sticking this down with my gel medium. That is because gel medium literally sticks anything to anything. And because we have multiple surfaces down there, and especially the fact there's all that stitching detail as well, it's a very uneven surface, and I wasn't sure that my traditional glue would hold up to it, but you know, you can rely on gel medium. It's brilliant stuff. And the reason that gel medium is so good is that it has an element of flex to it. So sometimes with your hot glue and things like that, it works for a while, but then you find things start pinging off a project, and that is because it becomes brittle as the project contracts and expands. The glue can become brittle and things can ping off. So sorry, my words are all over the place. Yeah, but that doesn't happen with gel medium because there is an element of flex, and all of your projects will have some sort of movement. It is paper, and due to moisture in the air or how dry the environment is, it will move. It's a bit like your wooden doors and floors and things like that. So it's just one of these natural phenomenons, but gel medium works with it. So it's a really good product to use with your mixed media. So just tucking down at the various edges there. I kind of really wanted this gorgeous forest detail at the front. I think it helps to build it. And also I was very aware that my gouache painting was not the best. And that's because I wasn't really focused on creating a gouache masterpiece. It was just to put a bit of a suggestion there, knowing that there's lots of other things. Now I thought we could have some extra detail in these trees. And quite often, if I was to have painted that, I would have gone in with some pencil detail and done some doodles. But I was like, we could do French knots. So I grabbed more thread out, this time pink, and I am just going to keep going round and adding lots of French knots to these trees. It was a little bit of a labour of love because we are going through fabric and gel medium and cardboard, so it wasn't the easiest. It was a bit tricky. You can quite often see me sort of wiggling the needle there, but we managed, and I think it looks fabulous. I still want some sort of traditional splatters too, so out comes the gouache again. At this time we are really watering it down rather than using it in a thicker format, and I'm just adding extra splatters to give that sort of idea of blossom coming off the trees. And I don't know, I just like a bit of a splatter. I just think it makes it look really pretty and nice. So we are getting to the final details of this particular page. We just need a sentiment. So I end up going for wander constantly to stay still. Seemed quite profound. So these are just different words from the Tim Holtz paper pack, and we stick those down, and then I decide just to sort of draw in a few little crosses to represent stitching. It seemed appropriate for the page, and then this is this page all done. I'm just going to show you it from multiple angles here, because sometimes I think when it comes to a very textural piece you don't necessarily see it straight on, but just sort of seeing it from various angles you can see how well that really works. So now it's time to move on to page number 2. So for this page, I decided to add a little bit of texture paste. So this is the Pretty Gets Gritty white texture paste. Oh my goodness, I love this stuff. It is just gorgeous. It's thick, it's creamy, it's pure white, and also it dries reasonably quickly. Now, to be honest, I was currently filming 4 different videos on the day that I was doing this. I had a lovely mixed media week and we had this amazing production line going on. So it had plenty of time to dry in its line in the production line. And that's honestly the best way I would recommend do mixed media, is don't work on one project from start to finish, because quite often a lot of things require drying time. But if you work on multiple at the same time, you can have a production line going on, and it just makes it nice and relaxing. So this has dried probably overnight, and now I have got my gesso. This gesso is gorgeous. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get hold of now, but it is the 13 Arts gesso. Dawn normally got it for me, and I know that she's having difficulty getting hold of it now, which is a shame. Apologise for that noise. That is the cat climbing over my printer trying to get to her bed. Anyway, the reason I like doing this particular step is quite often when you put a page together like this, obviously we've got the book paper down, we've got the fabric, and it can just look like you've grabbed a whole load of random scraps and thrown it on the paper, which essentially is exactly what we have done. But obviously we're trying to create a work of art, so we want it to look like it is meant to be. So I find that if I get the gesso here and particularly look at any sort of raw edges and just sort of knock them back a little bit, it helps it to look more cohesive and like it is meant to be together. Now we are putting the transparent gesso over. Same reason as before. We have book paper on here, we have texture paste, we have fabric, we have stitching, and I am going to now start adding colour mediums. Each of those things will react differently to the coloured medium, so we unify the surfaces by adding the clear gesso. Now I have decided to play with these liquid acrylics. I bought these last summer. They were sort of buy one get one half price or something like that, and I bought them, and as yet I've not had to play. Now this one does come up in a bit of a lump, but that is pure mica, so we don't need to worry about that. As you will see, once I start spraying it, that just disappears and just becomes gorgeous colour across the page. So I am adding a little bit of that lime green and the teal, and then I'm getting some water and spraying it so that we get movement. I love doing this. There's nothing more exciting than, well, maybe there is, I suppose, in life in general. There's stuff that's a lot more exciting, but I genuinely love watching, like spraying water and watching the colour move across the page. It's just so satisfying. So I'm just moving it in different directions so that we get drips forming in different areas. Now the cool thing about this is they are acrylic, therefore they are a permanent paint. So once that is all dry, I can then go in with another colour, use the same technique, and it's not going to get all muddy. So we've got the 3 primary colours here, and essentially they should make brown when mixed together. So we could have ended up with a real muddy look here, but because they are a permanent ink, we are not going to reactivate what is underneath. So had we used gouache or distress inks or watercolours, there would have been some sort of movement with the colour underneath, but we don't get that. So each of those colours has stayed as vibrant as it should, and I love it. So I absolutely need to play with these more. Now here comes the dry brushing. Yay! This is the bit we missed last time. So I get the gesso about 3/4 of the way up the brush. I'm holding my brush quite far back, so it's a really light pressure, and I'm going quite fast. Yes, this is sped up, but I was going quite fast in real life too. And this just helps to catch all the texture. I'm using my brush flat, but it's just, we've got all that gorgeous texture there, and it just helps us to find it again. Now I want to keep this page quite simple. I have taken out this flower image. This is from the Bumblebuzz collection, and in it we have ephemera sheets, and you get a coloured version and a line art version. So I've printed out the line art version, just normal size. It's printed as it kind of comes to you, and I've fussy cut this out, and I just want this to be the main focal point. and I'm also going to make it monochrome. So I'm just sort of cutting that out. I also, because I prefer to use my scissors, just saw me sort of poke a little hole in the centre there so I could get that middle bit out too. And then I'm just going to place it on the page to kind of see how it looks and see if there's any adjustments that need made. So when I did that, I realised it was going to look a little bit lost. It needed a bit more black just to make the project pop. So I've chosen this stamp because it mirrors the texture paste. Now, with the best will in the world, we are never ever going to get a perfect impression here because we're working over texture paste and paper and threads. It's a very, very uneven surface. So we're going to have to just embrace the imperfection of this. But what it has done is put a little bit of contrast on the page, which should make this image pop a little bit more. Now I want to keep this monochrome, so I've just taken a black pencil, and in the shadow areas I have burnished that. So I've pushed with quite a hard pressure in those areas to get them nice and black. And then I have just softened my pressure a little bit so that we get some of the shadow areas too. Again, I am using gel medium to stick this down because we are working on a very uneven surface. So in order for it to stick, we need our gel medium. And then I thought Dawn's floral sentiments would be perfect for this. So I love her sentiments. You should check the next Dawn and Julia create as well. Her sentiments get a bit of a showcase as well, and they are gorgeous ones. So anyway, I add these black and white sentiments, and that is that finished. Now I think of the two, I prefer the second one, which is funny because it was the first project that I had in my head, so it shows it's really good to experiment. Please do pop over and see the lovely Dawn too.